Alrighty, welcome guys to chapter 5. In this particular chapter, we are looking at the regulation of systems of both plants and animals, and then what happens when some of these things fail. So let's jump into it. All right, we're going to start with 5.1, looking at regulatory mechanisms in plants. Okay, now a lot of the stuff that we are talking about in 5.1 has already been discussed in chapter 4, but we're just going to go over it again. Okay, so we're going to start with the idea of gas exchange. Okay, gas exchange is the process of transporting gases in and out of a plant. Now, this is nothing new. We've already learnt about gas exchange, and actually animals use gas exchange as well. But for plants, there's kind of two moments in which gas exchange plays a role: during photosynthesis and during respiration. Okay. Now, during respiration, which occurs in the leaves, the stems, and the roots, basically every part of the plant needs to respire. We should see gas exchange push CO2 out of the plant and oxygen into the plant, okay? Whereas during photosynthesis, which only happens in the leaves and the stem parts that are green, you would see carbon dioxide go into the plant and oxygen go out of the plant, okay? So remember that respiration happens all the time, whereas photosynthesis happens during the moments where there is sunlight available for the plant. To facilitate the gas exchange, plant cells are usually loosely packed, allowing the gases to actually move quickly throughout the cells and get to where they need to go. Okay, so to do that, there's a few different ways. So the roots, they have a lot of air spaces between them, and so plant roots often grow best where the soil is actually loosely packed, loamy, and usually well drained, allowing water and air to move through into the roots and allow oxygen in particular to go into the roots so that they can respire. Okay. Now, when you get to the stems, the stems can sometimes have a barrier of bark over them, and so what you often find is that there are areas along the stem or the trunk where there are porous coverings called lenticels, which are just located here, and they're very loosely packed, allowing gas to move in through there and reach the inner lining of the plants. Okay. When you get to the leaves, the leaf structure itself allows for gases to move in and out quite freely through the stomata, and then past the stomata you have what we call the spongy mesophyll, right? The spongy mesophyll, as the name suggests, is quite spongy in nature, and there's lots of empty pockets where air can saturate into that space, and then it catches into where the plant needs to both respire and photosynthesize. Okay, now the stomata plays a really important role, which we're going to look at later, but for now you can see there's the loosely packed spongy mesophyll. Okay. Now, in good conditions, where the plant is experiencing lots of sunlight and availability of water, you should be able to see two things happen. Number one, the stomata is going to open. The guard cells that are on the either side of the stomatal opening, they're going to become turgid and they're going to open up. Okay, as they open up, they're going to allow water to leave the leaf and draw more water from below. A lot of people think that water is going to go into the leaf in order to photosynthesize, but that's actually not true. Water comes in through the plant from the roots, and then it makes its way up the stem and through the leaves, through this little vascular bundle, and then it's going to leave the leaf, and in doing so, it's going to draw more water up, creating this kind of conveyor belt of water moving up the plant. And then as it does that, it will use some of that water for photosynthesis. Okay. In addition, the stomatal opening is also going to allow carbon dioxide to enter into the leaf. Now, the combination of those two things alongside with the availability of sunlight is going to then allow photosynthesis to occur. The plant is going to produce glucose as a result of photosynthesis, which is then going to be translocated to the rest of the plant. So the glucose produced by these cells here, they're going to be transported into the phloem vessels in the vascular bundle and make its way down to the rest of the plant. And then any excess oxygen that is produced by those photosynthetic cells, they're going to leave the leaf. Okay. Now, the plant has to kind of do a bit of a balance in this because you're not always going to have good conditions. Sometimes there are poor conditions in which there is either no sunlight or no availability of water, and the plant is going to experience drought. Okay. Now, when those things happen, what happens is that the stomata is going to close. The guard cells are going to become flaccid, and then you're going to lock in and prevent gas exchange from moving down to a minimal level. That means you're going to get little or no H2O or CO2 exchange with the cell, and then you're not going to get photosynthesis occurring, right? Now, for a short period of time, this is, a good way to protect the plant from, losing too much water or, using up the water that it has. But the plant eventually still needs to undergo respiration. So eventually we should see that under poor conditions, eventually the stomata opening will allow oxygen to enter into the leaf so that it can respire, and then carbon dioxide to leave the leaf so that it can respire and get rid of that excess carbon dioxide. So the plant's breathing just the way that that animals breathe, where we need oxygen into our lungs and we push carbon dioxide out. Okay, here's a little microscope image of the stomatal when it's closed and when it is open, right? Let's hone in on that. You can see here this little animation shows you the stomatal opening and closing, and here is the structure in both those positions. Okay. Now those guard cells, they're found. The stomata, they're found anywhere on the plant except the roots, because the roots don't photosynthesize. They're underground. They're not going to get any sunlight. Okay. Whereas in mainly the leaf, it is most abundant. And particularly most abundant on the undersurface of the leaf, right? Water entering the guard cells, they're going to obviously open, and they do that actually by the fact that the plant plays a very important role of active transporting potassium in and out of these particular guard cells, and then that's going to allow water to move in and out according to those ratios. And by pumping the water in, it's going to make it turgid. Now, the thing about the structure of these guard cells is that the cell wall lining on this side is much thicker than on this side, allowing the cell to bend much like a coffee bean rather than just inflate normally the way that a turgid cell would just inflate. Okay, and then obviously when the water leaves, it shrinks because it's lost a lot of osmotic pressure, and then it becomes flaccid, closing that particular stoma opening. Okay. Now, when it comes to how plants regulate, one of the things that they need to regulate is water. The other thing they need to regulate is nutrients, and both of these happens through those vascular bundles that the cell uses, right? We talked about transpiration in the previous chapter, where it is the passive movement of water up a plant, not requiring any energy. And basically, transpiration starts at the roots, where water can move in two particular ways, either through the root cells, which is what we call the cytoplasmic pathway, or between the cell walls of each of those root cells, which is what we call the extracellular pathway. Here are the two pathways in which water can move in the roots. So you can imagine these are your little root hairs, and there's the root. It can absorb water through the cytoplasm of the cell and go through each of the cytoplasm of the cell, or it can go in between the cells themselves, right? Now, this is actually not quite ideal, because if it moves between the cells can't actually regulate those things. Whereas if it moves in through the cell can regulate that. And so usually there's a Casparian strip somewhere around here after a couple of layers of the cell that's going to prevent the water from moving between the cells and forcing them through the cells and through the cytoplasmic pathway. Okay, the cytoplasmic pathway allows water to move in by the active transport of dissolved minerals, right? So the minerals are actively taken into the roots because first of all, the plant needs those minerals to build their cells, but second of all, because the taking up of minerals is going to increase the ion concentration, water is going to passively move via osmosis through the roots. And so the active taking up of ions in the roots is going to then cause the passive osmosis and diffusion of roots. And then sometimes you get a little bit of diffusion of the minerals anyway, right? Now, how do these dead cells transfer water, right? So once again, just to rehash the idea, once they go in through the roots, you're going to experience adhesion and cohesion, which moves up the plant. And remember, this takes no energy. And so adhesion and cohesion are physical phenomena of water. Adhesion is when water sticks to the cell wall, and then cohesion is when water sticks to itself. And these two processes, combined with the fact that these xylem vessels are really, really thin, they're going to prevent water from moving back down via gravity. So water is going to slowly wick its way up through capillary action up along these xylem vessels up. And then at the leaf, as the leaf photosynthesizes and releases water through the stomata, it's going to draw more water from underneath, and that's called transpiration pool. Okay. Now, there are multiple conditions that are going to affect the rate of transpiration, and the plant needs to kind of balance these conditions. They include mainly the opening and closing of the stomata. This is obviously the biggest factor, because if the stomata opens, you allow gas exchange and you kickstart that transpiration pool process, allowing transpiration to move its way up the plant. Okay, when the stomata is closed, that's going to slow it down. And a variety of things are going to affect whether the stomata open or close. Okay, the number of stomata within a plant is usually fixed. All right, the plant kind of depending on the species of the plant and how old the plant is, etc., that's going to be pretty fixed. However, the opening rate, how frequently it's going to open and close, that's going to depend on the time and the weather condition. Okay, so for example, in drought conditions, stomatas are more likely to stay closed than open, even though you have in the desert an abundance of sunlight. Okay, conversely, if you have conditions in which the plant, for example, experiences a lot of humidity or something like that, that's also going to decrease that particular rate. Okay, so humidity, sunlight, temperature, wind, all of those things play a role. Okay, the second thing that the plant needs to regulate in its cells is nutrients. Okay, so what happens after the plant has photosynthesized, produced glucose, and needs to get the nutrients to where it needs to go. Okay, translocation, not transpiration. Translocation is the transport of organic compounds throughout the plant. Okay, it's occurring through the phloem vessels, which are located very close to the xylem vessels. But unlike the xylem vessels, the phloem vessels are going to use energy to actively transport this particular nutrients. Okay, there are two particular areas of interest that we want to consider within the plant. These are sources where nutrients like glucose is produced, such as the leaves or the stem, anywhere that's green and is photosynthesizing, and then sinks. So sinks are where nutrient is needed but cannot be produced on their own. So for example, the roots, the stems, the flowers, and the fruits can't produce their own sugars because they rely on the leaf. And so they sink in the sense that they require nutrients to be transported to those places. Okay. The main material that moves through the plant is sap, and sap is predominantly made of sucrose, which is a type of carbohydrate. Sucrose is very soluble, which means it moves quite freely in the water, and that's a good advantage for the plant. And so when the plant photosynthesizes, it's going to convert the glucose into sucrose first, and then it's going to send it through the phloem vessels. Okay, so how does this work? First of all, if you take a look at this particular diagram, you can see there that the glucose is produced and converted into sucrose at the leaf cell. Okay. Now, as it produces those things, it's going to then be actively transported through the companion cells. These are the companion cells that are attached between the leaf source and the phloem, and then that active transport of glucose through into the companion cell is going to push from the leaf into the companion cells, and then through the companion cells into the phloem vessels called sieve tubes. These are the sieve tubes here. Okay, they're lined up against each other, and then there are pores that allow the sucrose to move through. Okay, this also is going to increase the concentration of sucrose in these particular phloem vessels, and then water from the xylem vessels next to the phloem vessels is going to move into the phloem just purely via osmosis. So it moves in there, and then that is going to then allow the pressure difference between here, these sources, and then here, the sinks, and pushes the sap to move into those areas. So, at the leaf near the stem, at the stem near the leaf, that's going to be really high concentration. But as we move further away to another spot, like say the flower, that's going to be lower in concentration. It gets to the sink spot. So in this particular case, let's say that's the root cell. Companion cells are then going to actively draw up the sucrose and then deliver it to those particular cells so that they can be used. So that particular process here and here requires energy, and then here and here again also requires energy. Okay, once you get the solute concentration dropping here, the water is going to then move out of the phloem vessels and then back into the xylem vessels where there are dissolved ions in here, and that's going to happen also quite passively as well. So you can see there a cooperation between the phloem and the xylem. Okay. All right, well, that's it for this particular video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you guys in 5.2 when we look at homeostatic mechanisms in animals. We'll see you guys then.